Some stories don't scream for attention. They wait, in the shadows, hidden behind polite smiles and quiet streets. This is a place for slow justice, for truths that arrive too late, and for whispers that pierce deeper than any shout. Welcome to Whispers of Vengeance. My name is Wright. I'm 46, a father of 2 teenagers, and I've learned what grief never teaches in sermons. People don't fear cruelty, they fear exposure. Life in Ashford Hollow seemed calm, orderly, perfect for those who like to judge silently, but behind the masks, lies festered. My late wife's betrayal, the church's blind allegiance, and the way my children were harassed left marks no therapy could erase overnight. This isn't a story about revenge alone, it's about what happens when lies feel safe, when abusers think they are untouchable, and when the truth finally finds its voice. Listen closely. Some whispers demand to be heard. They say grief makes people gentle. That's a lie. Grief doesn't soften hearts. It reveals them. My name is Wright. I live in Ashford Hollow, a town where people smile politely, and judge silently. Last year, my wife Clara passed away unexpectedly. What most didn't know and what her parents wanted hidden was that she had secrets. 2 children from another life, hidden from me. And the church, the community that preached honesty, sided with deception. The first time I realized my sons were caught in the crossfire, I knew nothing would ever feel safe again. Not the streets, not the market, not even our home. I work as a financial compliance analyst. Numbers never lie, people do. My sons, Henry, 17, and Liam, 15, uncovered their mother's betrayal. 2 newborn boys. Another family. The children were sent away to distant relatives after Clara's death. Henry and Liam became targets of blame by their grandparents, by strangers in the church, by the ones who were supposed to protect them. Therapy helped, but scars lingered. The grandparents demanded custody, demanded obedience, demanded submission. When courts refused, they tried a different weapon, community pressure. The church. And they were relentless. Ashford Hollow's weekend market seemed harmless. Fresh bread, honey jars, laughter in the square. It was Liam's birthday week. I gave him freedom, a small budget to buy whatever he wanted. An hour passed. Then my phone rang. He was crying. "Dad, they won't let me leave," Liam whispered. I found him surrounded by 6 older women. Church members. Familiar, friendly faces twisted into something darker. They called him ungrateful, unchristian. One accused him of denying his family, of rejecting duty. Another whispered, "You're not protecting your baby brothers," their voices sharp, accusing. I felt fury rise slowly, carefully. I stayed calm, told Henry to pay for Liam's items and moved to the car. Then I faced them. The women followed us to the car. Like vultures circling prey. One said I failed as a husband, another said grief wasn't an excuse for rebellion. Security escorted us out of the market. That night, after my son slept, I logged into the church's Facebook group. Margaret, my late wife's mother, had posted a story. It painted me as cruel. My sons as heartless. And Clara as a saint. The affair children, she twisted the truth, claimed I had abandoned them, called them surrogates. The posts were filled with prayers, and poison. I realized this wasn't just about judgment. It was about control. And I had something they never expected, the truth. That church tolerated many things. Gossip, arrogance, minor sins, but adultery was unforgivable. Margaret had crafted her story carefully, weaving half-truths and biblical references to protect her son's image. She accused me of neglecting the babies, of abandoning them, even claimed I had approved a surrogate. I scrolled through endless posts, seeing prayers and judgments pile up against me and my sons. Yet, in all their righteous fury, they didn't realize one crucial fact: I had proof. Texts, emails, photographs, every hidden conversation, every lie they told to manipulate my children, they were all archived. The very messages where they blamed my sons for revealing their mother's betrayal, calling them responsible for tragedies, were saved. I realized that if I revealed the truth, no sermon, no moral lecture, no pious comment could shield them from the weight of reality. And for the first time, I felt a cold satisfaction, a quiet anticipation. The reckoning wouldn't be loud, it would be deliberate, precise, and unavoidable, just as patience should be. I spent a day at the print shop, selecting heavy, high-quality paper. Each binder was carefully constructed, designed to resemble the church hymn packets left for congregants. Inside, every photograph of Clara with her other partner, every incriminating text, and every email showing my sons being harassed was included. I labeled each binder meticulously, making it impossible to ignore the truth at a glance. Early Sunday morning, before the congregation arrived, I placed them quietly at the back of the church, near the hymn desk. No announcement. No confrontation. Just patience and precision. By the time service began, the binders had already started their work. Members opened them, brows furrowed, whispers spreading like wildfire. The pastor intervened, trying to keep discussions calm, but the damage was already done. Margaret and Colin, confronted silently by undeniable evidence, found themselves isolated. Social judgment, once directed at me, had turned on them. By the following week, the Wrights had left the church entirely, posting laments of neglect and alienation online, but their audience had evaporated. Apology messages arrived for my sons, small notes of sympathy and concern, invitations for community support, but nothing could undo the years of manipulation and psychological pressure. My sons and I, finally unshackled, felt a quiet liberation. I didn't feel triumphant. That wasn't the point. This was about exposing the truth, showing that lies, even those dressed in faith, cannot survive careful, deliberate attention. We returned to our routines, the market, our quiet home in Ashford Hollow, aware that vigilance was necessary but no longer fearful. I watched my sons laugh, argue, and thrive, knowing they would carry the lessons of patience, justice, and discernment with them. And I realized that vengeance, when done thoughtfully and morally, doesn't need to scream, it whispers, and sometimes that whisper is louder than any accusation. In the stillness of the evening, after the market's chatter had faded, I sat alone with a cup of tea, reflecting. The truth, once hidden, now had weight. Lies had been dismantled not with anger, but with precision and calm. The church, the community that had judged without understanding, learned that reality cannot be suppressed forever. My sons slept upstairs, safe and unburdened by falsehoods. I knew they would grow stronger, wary but wise, carrying both the scars and the empowerment of having survived manipulation and harassment. For myself, I felt an unexpected serenity. The revenge was not about humiliation, it was about justice, clarity, and closure. Some might call it vindictive, others necessary. But the lesson remained: patience, evidence, and courage are far more powerful than fear and deceit. In Ashford Hollow, life continued quietly, yet beneath the calm, the whisper of vengeance lingered, a reminder that truth, once unleashed, cannot be silenced. Some people think grief makes you vulnerable. They're wrong. Grief sharpens your perception. I, Edward Wright, learned that in Ashford Hollow. The town seems calm, but whispers linger behind polite smiles and closed doors. After my wife Clara died, I realized our lives were under constant observation: church members, distant relatives, strangers who thought they knew my sons and me. Every step we took felt measured, judged. My sons, Henry and Liam, were vulnerable, constantly reminded by their grandparents that they were rebellious or disobedient. The world can be cruel to children who know too much. I watched from the kitchen window as strangers passed, thinking I didn't see them. But I did. Every scornful glance, every judgmental whisper, they became fuel, a quiet fire inside me that whispered, the truth is more powerful than fear. And when the time came, that truth would strike not violently, but with precision, dismantling every lie one carefully printed page at a time. The church, with its hymns and sermons, thought it was safe from scandal. They never suspected I had evidence of Clara's betrayal, the hidden messages, and emails that revealed manipulation, deception, and psychological abuse. I spent hours organizing the proof, knowing that a single misstep could let them escape accountability. I photographed conversations, printed texts, and collected screenshots of my sons being unjustly blamed for events far beyond their control. When the binders were ready, I didn't announce myself. I didn't confront anyone directly. I placed them at the back of the church, in plain sight, disguised as ordinary hymn packets. As service began, the binders waited quietly. Each page revealed lies, manipulation, and hidden truths. Congregants opened them slowly, whispers turning into murmurs, murmurs into tension. The pastor intervened, but the damage was done. The false narrative that had protected my wife's parents collapsed. They had underestimated patience, preparation, and the quiet determination of a man defending his sons. By midweek, the fallout became impossible to ignore. Margaret and Colin Wright, once respected members of the church, faced quiet but relentless judgment. They attempted to post defenses online, lamenting how misunderstood and abandoned they felt, but their audience had shifted. Sympathy now leaned toward my sons and me. People saw the binders, the irrefutable evidence, the manipulation that had been hidden for so long. Apologies and notes of support trickled in from members who had previously sided with them. Yet, it wasn't revenge in the traditional sense, it was exposure. The truth had weight, gravity that no sermon or prayer could negate. I watched my sons begin to heal, their laughter returning slowly, not because punishment had been inflicted, but because reality had corrected itself. Lies had no room to breathe, and those who had thrived on deceit were left in silence. That quiet judgment felt heavier than any shouted accusation. It was complete, absolute, and permanent. In the weeks that followed, Ashford Hollow felt the same on the surface: market stalls, morning mist, and polite greetings, but the undercurrent had changed. My sons, Henry and Liam, moved freely without fear of judgment or harassment. They laughed, teased, and played, carrying the weight of experience with a new resilience. I reflected on what had happened, understanding that revenge isn't always loud or violent. It can be subtle, deliberate, and profoundly moral when wielded with care. The binders, the evidence, and the patient exposure of truth had done what anger alone could never achieve. The lesson was simple: patience, preparation, and courage are more powerful than fear, lies, or manipulation. In quiet corners of Ashford Hollow, people whispered about the events, unaware of the careful orchestration behind them. And in my home, for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just clarity. Justice, I realized, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and that whisper is louder than any lie. Revenge doesn't arrive suddenly. It waits. Like shadows lingering in the corners, unnoticed but inevitable. I, Edward Wright, had learned patience in ways no textbook or sermon could teach. Every email, every photograph, every word of harassment directed at my sons had been collected carefully, methodically. I didn't act in anger, I acted with precision. Each binder I placed in the church pews was a calculated whisper, a quiet, undeniable truth that would unsettle those who had thrived on deception. As members opened the packets, murmurs spread. Eyes widened. Faces turned pale. I watched from the shadows, knowing that my presence wasn't required for justice to take hold. The church, once a place of false sanctity for Margaret and Colin Wright, had become an arena where truth, finally unleashed, demanded recognition. That whisper was enough. It shook the foundation of their authority, leaving them exposed, isolated, and forced to confront the consequences of years spent manipulating, judging, and lying. By the following Sunday, the fallout was unmistakable. Margaret and Colin, who had once been pillars of their congregation, had been quietly shunned. They posted laments online, claiming alienation and neglect, but the church's focus had shifted irrevocably. My sons received apologies, notes of sympathy, and offers of support from those who had formerly sided with the Wrights. Yet the most satisfying part wasn't public vindication, it was the private relief in my home. Henry and Liam moved freely, no longer fearful of judgment, manipulation, or the shadow of lies. The binders had done more than expose deception, they had restored balance. Lies, even when protected by faith or social stature, cannot survive deliberate truth. Observing my sons regain their innocence, I realized that quiet, thoughtful action often carries far greater power than any confrontation or angry outburst. In the still evenings of Ashford Hollow, I often reflected on what had occurred. Justice, I understood, is not always visible. It can unfold silently, like a whisper through a darkened room, leaving no scars but imprints that last a lifetime. I did not gloat, nor did I feel triumphant. I simply acknowledged that patience, courage, and careful preparation had corrected a narrative built on lies and manipulation. My sons learned the value of discernment and resilience. They saw that even in a world filled with judgment and deceit, truth could prevail. Margaret and Colin had overestimated control, underestimated patience, and ignored the quiet power of evidence. And in the calm aftermath, life returned to our home, not loud, not triumphant, just clear and unburdened. Revenge is a whisper, not a roar. I, Edward Wright, realized that exposing the truth carefully, without malice, is more potent than any angry confrontation. My sons sleep peacefully upstairs, unburdened, while I sit quietly, reflecting on lessons learned. Patience, preparation, and moral courage triumph where impulsive anger fails. The church's whispers now carry cautionary tales of deception, the fallout of lies, and the inevitability of truth. Life in Ashford Hollow continues. Markets bustle, streets are calm, smiles are polite, but beneath the surface, the shadow of what happened lingers. A reminder that lies, no matter how carefully constructed, cannot withstand the deliberate, patient revelation of truth. In the end, justice doesn't need to scream. It whispers, and sometimes that whisper echoes louder than any lie ever could. In Ashford Hollow, the streets seem quiet, but nothing stays hidden for long. I, Edward Wright, had learned to notice the smallest details: the way neighbors lingered at windows, the subtle glances from church members. My sons, Henry and Liam, had been under this constant, silent observation for months. Every step they took, every word they spoke, was scrutinized. The Wrights believed control could be maintained through fear and moral pressure. But patience, as I had discovered, turns observation into vulnerability. I documented everything carefully: whispered accusations, online manipulations, even private messages intended to shame and isolate my sons. Each piece of evidence became a thread in a tapestry that, when revealed, would dismantle their carefully constructed illusions. Shadowed eyes and hushed judgments could not withstand calculated truth. By the time the binders were in place, exposing manipulation wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming freedom and dignity for my children. The quiet power of evidence was about to be unleashed, and Ashford Hollow would never see the Wrights the same way again. Revenge is rarely immediate. It requires strategy, patience, and meticulous planning. I spent days organizing every photograph, message, and email that documented Clara's betrayal and the harassment my sons endured. Each binder was crafted with care, disguised as a hymn packet, ordinary in appearance but lethal in content. The goal wasn't humiliation, it was exposure. When I placed the binders at the back of the church, it was like planting seeds in fertile ground. Congregants would open them, piece together the truth, and realize that those who had manipulated and judged were themselves guilty of deception. Watching the initial reactions, murmurs spreading through the pews, I felt no glee, only a measured satisfaction. Justice, after all, does not need drama, it needs precision. The Wrights, blind to my preparations, were about to discover that patience and careful planning wield a power far greater than immediate confrontation or shouting matches ever could. As the binders circulated, I remained a silent observer. Congregants whispered, brows furrowed, and the pastor intervened, but the truth had already settled like a weight in the room. Margaret and Colin Wright, once pillars of moral authority, were unmasked not by accusations, but by undeniable proof. I watched my sons from a distance, their expressions a mix of relief and cautious disbelief. They had lived under blame and manipulation for too long, and now they witnessed justice unfold without anger or retaliation from me. The most powerful moments are often the quietest: a look, a realization, a subtle shift in perception. I had taught them that patience, evidence, and moral clarity can dismantle even the most entrenched lies. The Wright's authority crumbled, not through force, but by the inevitability of truth. In that moment, I understood that silence can be as potent as any confrontation, and that justice whispered is often louder than any accusation shouted into the wind. In the days that followed, Ashford Hollow absorbed the shock quietly. The Wrights attempted online posts, trying to defend themselves, but their credibility had evaporated. Apologies and support reached my sons from unexpected corners of the church, acknowledging years of manipulation and unfair judgment. I, Edward Wright, finally allowed myself to exhale. The binders had accomplished more than exposing deceit, they had restored dignity to my sons and clarity to our lives. We returned to our routines, to the market, to the quiet streets of Ashford Hollow, aware that vigilance was still necessary but no longer fearful. The lesson had been learned: lies, even when reinforced by faith, status, or social expectation, cannot withstand patient, deliberate revelation. And in our home, the quiet echo of justice lingered not as vengeance, but as a reminder that truth, once revealed, carries a weight far greater than fear, gossip, or manipulation ever could. By the following week, the town had begun to murmur in hushed tones. Margaret and Colin Wright were no longer untouchable figures of moral authority. Their posts online, full of self-pity and claims of alienation, went largely unnoticed. The church community had shifted subtly, sympathy aligning with my sons and me. I, Edward Wright, walked through Ashford Hollow's streets with a newfound clarity. The market stalls, the morning mist, the polite smiles, they all remained the same, but beneath that familiar veneer, the balance of power had changed. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it moves silently, like a shadow slipping through the cracks, unnoticed until it has already taken hold. My sons sensed it too. Henry and Liam walked taller, laughed louder, and began reclaiming the life that had been shadowed by lies. The binders had done their work. Patience, careful planning, and undeniable truth had restored equilibrium. I spent evenings reflecting on what had happened. The binders, once objects of careful strategy, had become symbols of clarity. I realized revenge isn't about malice, it's about exposure, precision, and moral rectitude. My sons witnessed a lesson far greater than punishment: that lies, no matter how carefully crafted, eventually collapse under scrutiny. Margaret and Colin Wright, once feared manipulators, were now cautious shadows in their own community. Meanwhile, Henry and Liam flourished in their newfound freedom. Life in Ashford Hollow had returned to quiet normalcy, but the lessons endured. Justice had whispered, not shouted. I had learned that patience, moral courage, and deliberate action can wield power far beyond immediate confrontation. Shadows of deceit were no match for evidence and clarity. And in that knowledge, a subtle peace settled over our home. Even after weeks had passed, Ashford Hollow still carried the faint resonance of what had occurred. People whispered of the Wrights' downfall, but few knew the full story. The binders, now gone from the church, had left behind an unseen echo, a lesson that truth, when carefully presented, cannot be denied. My sons, once burdened with blame and fear, moved through life with confidence tempered by experience. I observed them quietly, recognizing the delicate balance between vigilance and freedom. No one needed to witness my role directly, the evidence spoke for itself. Margaret and Colin had underestimated the quiet power of meticulous preparation. Lies had been shattered, reputations quietly dismantled, and the moral scales realigned. In the soft evenings, I understood that justice does not demand theatrics. Sometimes, a whisper suffices, echoing silently through corridors of influence, leaving an impression far more lasting than any shouted argument could. In the calm of our home, I often reflected on the journey we had endured. The market's morning bustle, the quiet streets, and the polite smiles of Ashford Hollow continued, seemingly unchanged, yet the world we walked through had subtly shifted. My sons, Henry and Liam, slept peacefully, free from manipulation, blame, and harassment. I, Edward Wright, realized that revenge is most potent when thoughtful, moral, and precise. The Wrights had been exposed, their lies dismantled, yet I felt no triumph, only clarity and resolution. The binders had spoken, whispers had carried, and truth had prevailed. In this quiet, moral reckoning, the lesson endured: patience, preparation, and courage are far stronger than fear or deceit. And though the story of our struggle remained largely unspoken, the shadow of justice lingered in Ashford Hollow. Some whispers, once set in motion, echo louder than any lie ever could. Ashford Hollow remained calm on the surface, yet shadows lingered in unexpected corners. I, Edward Wright, observed quietly as life returned to the rhythm of markets, neighbors, and morning mist. My sons, Henry and Liam, were no longer burdened by fear or judgment. But the memory of manipulation and false piety remained like a faint echo, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Margaret and Colin Wright tried to regain normalcy, but their influence had quietly dissolved. They no longer held authority, no longer commanded attention. Their whispered complaints were drowned out by the subtle understanding of the congregation, who had witnessed the binder's undeniable proof. In this quiet, the lessons endured: vigilance, patience, and moral clarity are forces stronger than fear or deceit. Shadows may linger, but they can no longer manipulate or threaten those prepared to see clearly. The balance of power had shifted, and the echo of justice whispered silently through the town. The binders had done their work, but their impact resonated far beyond that single Sunday. Members of the church began questioning old assumptions, re-evaluating what they had accepted without scrutiny. My sons noticed subtle changes to the way people listened, the way conversations shifted. Henry and Liam grew stronger, wiser, more cautious, yet freer than they had ever been. I realized that truth has a ripple effect, moving quietly through communities and changing hearts and minds without fanfare. My patience had paid off, and the careful orchestration of evidence ensured that the manipulative narratives could no longer survive. Margaret and Colin were left to face the consequences of their own deception, while we reclaimed our life in Ashford Hollow. In these quiet weeks, I understood that justice is often silent, but its echoes are felt for a lifetime, shaping not only the present but the future of those who endure and witness it. There is a power in restraint. I, Edward Wright, had learned that restraint does not mean inaction. It means planning, observing, and acting with precision. The binders were not a weapon of rage, they were instruments of clarity, exposing manipulation and lies in a way that anger never could. My sons watched, absorbing the lesson that patience and preparation often triumph over immediate confrontation. Margaret and Colin's false authority crumbled quietly, unseen by the wider world, yet deeply felt by those who had lived under their shadow. In our home, laughter returned. Shadows of fear lifted. The market, the streets, the quiet morning air of Ashford Hollow became ours again, reclaimed through patience, courage, and moral clarity. Revenge, I realized, is most effective when invisible, deliberate, and unshakable, leaving only the truth standing, unchallenged. Even now, as Ashford Hollow hums with ordinary life, the whispers of what transpired linger faintly. I, Edward Wright, reflect on the delicate balance between action and patience, between exposing lies and preserving dignity. My sons, Henry and Liam, move through life with new confidence, carrying lessons of vigilance, courage, and moral clarity. Margaret and Colin Wright, stripped of influence, can only watch quietly as the community moves forward. Justice had arrived without noise, without spectacle, it whispered. And sometimes, whispers are louder than the loudest accusations. The binders, the careful planning, and the deliberate revelation of truth had reshaped our lives and the town subtly, irreversibly. Shadows of deceit can linger, but they cannot survive patience, clarity, and courage. The echo of this quiet, moral reckoning remains a whisper that teaches, warns, and reminds that truth, once revealed, is unstoppable. The week after the binder's revelation, Ashford Hollow seemed unchanged. The market bustled, children played, and neighbors exchanged polite greetings. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet reckoning had taken place. I, Edward Wright, observed the subtle shifts, the way people now approached my sons, Henry and Liam, with newfound respect, the way whispers of judgment against Margaret and Colin had all but vanished. The Wrights attempted to rebuild their influence, but it was hollow, lacking the authority they once wielded. Truth had a gravity that no performance of piety could replace. My son's laughter returned, cautious but genuine. Life, for the first time in years, felt steady. Shadows lingered, but they no longer dictated our actions or instilled fear. I realized that justice, when carefully executed, does not demand celebration. It thrives in stillness, in quiet observation, in the subtle reshaping of perception. Sometimes the most powerful victories are invisible, carried only in the hearts of those who endured and survived. In the quiet evenings, I reflected on the lessons of patience, observation, and moral clarity. Henry and Liam had learned more than survival. They had absorbed the importance of discernment, the courage to question authority, and the value of evidence over hearsay. Margaret and Colin Wright remained as shadows, reminders of manipulation and unchecked judgment. The binders, though gone, had left a permanent impression on those who saw them. In Ashford Hollow, whispers traveled faster than sermons, the echoes of truth reached even those who preferred ignorance. I understood that revenge need not be violent or dramatic. It could be meticulous, careful, and guided by principle. Through patience and precise action, injustice could be corrected, lies exposed, and dignity restored. My sons now carried both resilience and wisdom, the quiet power of experience shaping their decisions. The community, too, had learned to pause before judgment. Justice is rarely simple. I, Edward Wright, had faced deception not with brute force, but with the deliberate unveiling of truth. Margaret and Colin Wright had believed moral authority could shield them from scrutiny, but evidence carries its own weight. My sons witnessed firsthand how careful, patient planning could overcome manipulation without cruelty. Life returned to our home in Ashford Hollow, the morning mist and market bustle a backdrop to restored stability. Shadows of past harassment remained only as lessons, cautionary echoes of deceit confronted. I recognized that vengeance need not stain one's conscience, it can exist as clarity, as restoration of balance, as moral rectitude. In exposing the lies, I had not only defended my sons but reshaped the narrative, ensuring that deception could no longer linger unchecked. The Wright's silence, their retreat, and the community's quiet acknowledgement became proof that patience guided by justice holds power far beyond anger or confrontation. In the calm of Ashford Hollow, I sit quietly, reflecting on the journey. Henry and Liam sleep peacefully upstairs, free from fear and manipulation. Margaret and Colin Wright are left to contend with the consequences of their own deception. The binders, the careful collection of evidence, and the strategic unveiling had restored balance without drama, without malice, without spectacle. Justice had whispered, subtle but undeniable. I realized that in life, patience, courage, and moral clarity can dismantle lies more effectively than anger ever could. Shadows may persist, but they are powerless against deliberate truth. Ashford Hollow carries on, unaware of the careful orchestration that protected two children and reclaimed their lives. And in that quiet, the whisper of vengeance and the power of truth lingers, a lesson etched into both the town and our hearts. Lies may manipulate the moment, but truth, patient and unwavering, endures forever.